File 12.
Then they broke into a low murmur of talking, and fell apart in couples, and moved towards their homes, still talking in that awed way, with faces close together, and laying a hand on an arm, and making other such gestures as people make when they have been deeply impressed by something. We boys followed behind our fathers, and listened, catching all we could of what they said, and when they sat down in our house and continued their talk, they still had us for company. They were in a sad mood, for it was certain, they said, that disaster for the village must follow this awful visitation of witches and devils. Then my father remembered that Father Adolf had been struck dumb at the moment of his denunciation.
"They have not ventured to lay their hands upon an anointed priest of God before," he said. "And how could they have dared it this time? I cannot make it out, for he wore his crucifix, isn't it so?" "Yes," said the others. "We saw it." "Oh, it is serious, friends, it is very serious. Always before we had a protection. It has failed."
The others shook, as with a sort of chill, and muttered those words over.
"It has failed. God has forsaken us."
"It is true,"
said Seppi, Vollmeier's father.
"There is nowhere to look for help." "The people will realize this," said Nicholas's father, the judge, "and despair will take away their courage and their energies. We have indeed fallen upon evil times."
He sighed, and Vollmeier said in a troubled voice,
"The report of it will go about the country, and our village will be shunned as being under the displeasure of God. The Golden Stag will know hard times." "True, neighbour," said my father. "All of us will suffer, all in repute, many in estate. And, good God, what is it? That can come to finish us." "Name it, Gottes Willen." "The interdict." It smote like a thunderclap, and they were like to swoon with the terror of it. Then the dread of this calamity roused their energies, and they stopped brooding and began to consider ways to avert it. They discussed this, that, and the other way, and talked till the afternoon was far spent, then confessed that at present they could arrive at no decision. So they parted sorrowfully, with oppressed hearts which were filled with bodings. While they were saying their parting words, I slipped out and set my course for Marget's house to see what was happening there. I met many people, but none of them greeted me. It ought to have been surprising, but it was not, for they were so distraught with fear and dread that they were not in their right minds, I think. They were white and haggard, and walked like persons in a dream, their eyes open but seeing nothing, their lips moving but uttering nothing, and worriedly clasping and unclasping their hands without knowing it. At Marget's it was like a funeral. She and Wilhelm sat on the sofa but said nothing, and not even holding hands. Both were steeped in gloom, and Marget's eyes were red from the crying she'd been doing. She said, "I have been begging him to go and come no more, and so save himself alive. I cannot bear to be his murderer. This house is bewitched, and no inmate will escape the fire. But he will not go,
and he will be lost with the rest." Wilhelm said he would not go. If there was danger for her, his place was by her, and there he would remain. Then she began to cry again, and it was all so mournful that I wished I'd stayed away. There was a knock now, and Satan came in, fresh and cheery and beautiful, and brought that whiny atmosphere of his, and changed the whole thing. He never said a word about what had been happening, nor about the awful fears which were freezing the blood in the hearts of the community, but began to talk and rattle on about all manner of gay and pleasant things, and next about music, an artful stroke which cleared away the remnant of Margit's depression, and brought her spirits and her interests broad awake. She had not heard anyone talk so well and so knowingly on that subject before, and she was so uplifted by it, and so charmed that what she was feeling lit up her face, and came out in her words, and Wilhelm noticed it, and did not look as pleased as he ought to have done. And next, Satan branched off into poetry, and recited some, and did it well, and Margit was charmed again, and again Wilhelm was not as pleased as he ought to have been, and this time Margit noticed it, and was remorseful. I fell asleep to pleasant music that night, the patter of rain upon the panes and the dull growling of distant thunder. Away in the night Satan came and roused me and said, "Come with me. Where shall we go?" "Anywhere. So it is with you." Then there was a fierce glare of sunlight, and he said, "This is China." That was a grand surprise, and made me sort of drunk with vanity and gladness to think I had come so far, so much further than anybody else in our village, including Bartel Sperling, who had such a great opinion of his travels. We buzzed around over that empire for more than half an hour, and saw the whole of it. It was wonderful, the spectacles we saw, and some were beautiful, others too horrible to think. For instance, however, I may go into that by and by, and also why Satan chose China for this excursion instead of another place. It would interrupt my tale to do it now. Finally, we stopped flitting and lit. We sat upon a mountain, commanding a vast landscape of mountain range and gorge and valley and plain and river, with cities and villages slumbering in the sunlight, and a glimpse of blue sea on the farther verge. It was a tranquil and dreamy picture, beautiful to the eye and restful to the spirit. If we could only make a change like that whenever we wanted to, the world would be easier to live in than it is, for change of scene shifts the mind's burdens to the other shoulder, and banishes old shop-worn wearinesses from mind and body both. We talked together, and I had the idea of trying to reform Satan and persuade him to lead a better life. I told him about all those things he'd been doing, and begged him to be more considerate and stop making people unhappy. I said I knew he did not mean any harm, but that he ought to stop and consider the possible consequences of a thing before launching it in that impulsive and random way of his. Then he would not make so much trouble. He was not hurt by this plain speech. He only looked amused and surprised, and said, "What? I do random things? Indeed I never do. I stop and consider possible consequences. Where's the need? I know what the consequences are going to be. Always. Oh, Satan, then how could you do these things?
Well, I'll tell you, and you must understand if you can. You belong to a singular race. Every man is a suffering machine and happiness machine combined. The two functions work together harmoniously, with a fine and delicate precision, on the give-and-take principle. For every happiness turned out in the one department, the other stands ready to modify it with a sorrow or a pain, maybe a dozen. In most cases, the man's life is about equally divided between happiness and unhappiness. When this is not the case, the unhappiness predominates, always, never the other. Sometimes a man's make and disposition are such that his misery machine is able to do nearly all the business. Such a man goes through life almost ignorant of what happiness is. Everything he touches, everything he does, brings misfortune upon him. You've seen such people? To that kind of a person, life is not an advantage, is it? It's only a disaster. Sometimes, for an hour's happiness, a man's machinery makes him pay years of misery. Don't you know that? It happens every now and then. I'll give you a case or two presently. Now, the people of your village are nothing to me. You know that, don't you?" I did not like to speak out too flatly, so I said I had suspected it. "Well, it's true that they're nothing to me. It's not possible they should be. The difference between them and me is abysmal, immeasurable. They have no intellect." "No intellect?" "Nothing that resembles it. At a future time I will examine what man calls his mind, and give you the details of that chaos. Then you will see and understand. Men have nothing in common with me. There's no point of contact. They have foolish little feelings, and foolish little vanities, and impertinences, and ambitions. Their foolish little life is but a laugh, a sigh, an extinction, and they have no sense. Well, only the moral sense. I'll show you what I mean. Here is a red spider, not so big as a pin's head. Can you imagine an elephant being interested in him, caring whether he's happy or isn't, or whether he's wealthy or poor, or whether his sweetheart returns his love or not, or whether his mother is sick or well, or whether he's looked up to in society or not, or whether his enemies will smite him or his friends desert him, or whether his hopes will suffer blight, or his political ambitions fail, or whether he shall die in the bosom of his family, or neglected and despised in a foreign land. These things can never be important to the elephant. They're nothing to him. He cannot shrink his sympathies to the microscopic size of them. Man is to me as the red spider is to the elephant. The elephant has nothing against the spider. He cannot get down to that remote level. I have nothing against man. The elephant is indifferent. I am indifferent. The elephant would not take the trouble to do the spider an ill turn. If he took the notion, he might do him a good turn, if it came in his way and cost nothing. I've done men good service, but no ill turns. The elephant lives a century, the red spider a day. In power, intellect, and dignity, the one creature is separated from the other by a distance which is simply astronomical. Yet in these, as in all qualities, Man is immeasurably further below me than is the wee spider below the elephant. Man's mind, clumsily and tediously and laboriously, patches little trivialities together and gets a result, such as it is. My mind creates. Do you get the force of that? Creates anything it desires, and in a moment. Creates without material, creates fluids, solids, colours, anything, everything, out of the airy nothing which is called thought. A man imagines a silk thread, imagines a machine to make it, imagines a picture, then by weeks of labour embroiders it on canvas with the thread. I think the whole thing, and in a moment it is before you, created. I think a poem, music, the record of a game of chess, anything, and it is there. This is the immortal mind. Nothing is beyond its reach. Nothing can obstruct my vision. The rocks are transparent to me, and darkness is daylight. I do not need to open a book. I take the whole of its contents into my mind at a single glance, through the cover. And in 1,000,000 years I could not forget a single word of it, or its place in the volume. Nothing goes on in the skull of man, bird, fish, insect, or other creature which can be hidden from me. I pierce the learned man's brain with a single glance, and the treasures which cost him 80 years to accumulate are mine. He can forget, and he does forget.